Welcome, and for a few brief comments from our general presidents, please.
Rick, thank you very much, and we appreciate everything you've done in your very storied career at the IFF. I know that Rick has taken a very well-deserved quasi-retirement. He's going to be retiring from the IFF after a very storied career with Local 2881 CAL FIRE, where he was a division chief, ran some major wildland fires in California over his career, came to the IFF, set up our wildland interzone program, has done an incredible amount of work in our safety division. We'll continue working with the IFF in various capacities with the NFPA committees, as well as the Wildland Conservatory that we're working on out in California. We thank you for everything you've done and with continued service. You're a great asset to the fire service and the IFF. It's my honor to be here. I forgot to take my gum out. I apologize. I'll tell you, when you think about what this class is, you know, where I'm from in Boston, we'd always say, see it the big one. This is the big one. And you're going to hear stories from people that were first due, the impacts that this had on the lives of not only civilians. You know, when you look at the lithium battery explosion, then 3-4 days ago in the Bronx, not the fire they had where they lost, I heard it was 17 people now. But the day before, they had a lithium battery fire in an apartment building that caused a high-risk situation with a lot of trapped people. So that risk, obviously, we're very lucky we didn't lose IFF members at that explosion. Myself, you know, I've had a couple of those high-risk, low-frequency events. You know, when I had about 2 years on the job when the Worcester cold storage fire happened. And when I work in Boston, about 45 minutes from Worcester. But at the time, my ladder company was a technical rescue company. And they basically shut down Rescue 1, my house, and sent the safety chief and district chief. And we were assigned to Worcester for 2 weeks digging. It was an experience that left an indelible mark a couple years later. Like thousands and thousands of other IFF members, I was on the pilot ground zero. That was the big one. Left an indelible impression on me. Then in 2013, when Boston Marathon was bombed, I was in my firehouse preparing to start the night tour. The companies were out. When they got back, I was relieving whoever I was relieving, and I heard them strike the box for the finish line at the marathon, and I heard my lieutenant calling off that we have 2 separate blast sites, and you know, it was one of those days. And I can tell you that when you live through them, they make their mark, you know? And at the end of the day, you hope that when you say, see you at the big one, they're not talking about you, that you were the story. And what we're doing today is to try to learn from the people that were there, learn from the experts. Sean Ducrane, battalion chief from Cleveland, now working in the underwriters' laboratories, has done some real technical research on exactly reconstructing what happened so that we can learn, take it back with us, and not only protect ourselves, not only protect the public, but the brothers and sisters next to you. And truthfully, as I was looking at this class, I wish I was sitting here because I'm a senior man back home. And I think I'm going to work Sunday. And if my boss is acting captain down the street or has to utilize his sick leave benefit, I'll be running a crew. And I wish I had little deeper knowledge of every little bit of what you're going to learn today, because you don't want to be that decision maker on that first new company 3, 4, 5 minutes after it hit the fan, trying to make decisions on the fly. I mean, you got to make decisions on the fly, but you hope that you're doing them with as much knowledge as you could muster before the box came in. So with that, I wish you guys all the best. I hope you're having a good time. This is a class that, this would be on my #1 pick list if I had time to sit through other classes, but I'm juggling a lot right now. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to our presenters for what you're doing and what you built here, and have a great time here at Alts. Thank you. I'm putting my mask on with you. Yeah, I'm trying to play ball right, you know?
Yeah, I know.
All right, thanks, buddy. All right, take care. Sean, take care. Yep.
Thank you very much, sir, for the kind words for myself, and to kick this story off, because these two stories off, because these are some very impactful conversations that we're going to have here and understanding of what's going on. The first program I'd like to kick off is the Surprise Arizona event that Sean DeCrane is, and we've been lucky enough to be a part of these investigations and conversations with some of the folks from Surprise, and actually from Peoria, because Surprise was the city that it occurred in. Peoria is actually the city where the units were from. So we were trying to have a few of those folks here today with us, but again, COVID is causing all kinds of hell still, so we were only able to have this conversation going through and with the PowerPoint with Sean, and giving some firsthand experiences of those events. And for folks that are coming into the room, there's plenty of room up at the front. No, it's not like church, please, so come on up, and there's still plenty of seats. So with that, I'd like to introduce Sean DeCrane, like the GP said, from the Underwriters Laboratory. Sean.
Thank you, Rick. And I also want to congratulate you on your retirement. I've worked with Rick a number of years. As the GP mentioned and Rick mentioned, I spent 26 years in Cleveland Fire, and I represented the IFF in the code and standard development for 10, 11 years. It seems like 100 years, but I'm also fortunate enough to be a member of the UL FSRI Advisory Board. And so today I want to talk to you about an incident, as the General President mentioned and as Rick mentioned, that happened that put 4 of our members in the hospital with serious injuries. And we're looking at it as a near-miss project. So we were actually at the Congressional Fire Service Institute's dinner when this event occurred. And I remember standing with Pat Morrison and Kevin Roach and a couple of others when we started getting more information. And as you know, here in the U.S., we have NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, has a great program to look at line of duty deaths, right? At the invitation of the local jurisdiction, NIOSH will come in. They'll also engage fire service experts, representatives from the IFF, industry experts, to evaluate a situation and to issue a report. That report is a public document. It's not there to lay blame. It's not there to identify individuals or certain entities and lay fault. It's to identify what the contributing factors were and then develop some recommendations to be used as an educational tool that maybe if we get that information out, we can reduce the chance of that incident occurring again. What we really see that is missing from the UL FSRI perspective is that NIOSH is really taxed to do those line of duty deaths reports. They don't have the capacity, they don't have the funding to conduct near-miss reports. And one of the valuable things that we believe out of the near-miss reports is that we can talk to the individuals who were part of the incident itself. You know, what were they thinking? What were they seeing? What was their decision-making process? Recreate that event from their perspective. So we're missing that perspective. So when we got the call and we were talking about it at CFSRI, we decided, you know what, this might be a project where we go out and we learn from it. And so initially UL was funding it, but why we were going through this funding or why we were going through this process, an AFG grant became available. But as I mentioned, this report is actually developed by UL FSRI. At the time it was the Firefighter Research Institute, now it's Fire Safety Research Institute. And we had three individuals, myself, Steve Kerber, who's our vice president, and one of our engineers, Mark McKinnon. And our goal is to increase or reduce firefighter fatalities and injuries through the increased education of the fire service. But we've also evolved a little bit where we can expand. You know, UL has asked us to expand our area of, I don't want to say influence, but participation. We can start to look at a wider group of events and really look at occupant safety as well. Who is FSRI? Well, we don't conduct research for the fire service. We conduct research with the fire service. So just to get a little, after lunch, get up and go, I thought I'd play a quick video. So as I mentioned, we conduct our research with the fire service, and I think that was a critical part, right? Because when we went out to Arizona, one of the things we really needed to establish with those members was trust. We were asking for them to trust us, for them to trust us to tell their story, right? And we had already seen by the time we got out there, and because of legalities and legal issues within this incident, we were delayed to go out there for 6 months. But once we got out there, we really needed to establish the trust with the membership, because at that point in time, they had already been deposed by the Arizona Occupational Safety and Health Administration, looking in their report. Industry was talking to them, others were talking to them, trying to pick at their story. So as I mentioned previously, UL was starting to fund this project on its own because we believed in the importance of this project and the importance of telling the story. But as we were going through the process, AFG stepped up and asked FSRI to conduct 4 near-miss projects, and we're continuing on those. But we're going to focus on Arizona. So just to give a quick little background, this is an energy storage dedicated facility. A couple of key points to remember is that Surprise, Arizona, in the Phoenix Valley, let me go there first. In the Phoenix Valley, they operate on an automatic mutual response agreement. So regardless of where you are in that valley, if you call 911, the Phoenix Metro Dispatch Center, they will send the nearest appropriate response, regardless of jurisdictional guideline, whether it's Glendale, Tempe, Surprise, Peoria, Phoenix, they'll send the closest appropriate response. So this event occurred in Surprise, but as you'll see here, the members that were injured were from the Peoria Fire Department. Not only did, Surprise, when they got this alarm, didn't even realize this building existed. They had no idea that the building was there, let alone it was an energy storage facility. This facility, as you can see here, I want to point out, it's a nice rectangular facility. It's got 4 HVAC systems on the B side here. It has 4 on the opposite side. And I want you to look at the nice, clean, straight walls in this picture because it's very different when I go on further. It's 2 megawatts. Just as a kind of a comparison, an average home in Arizona will consume 1 megawatt per month. So this is a significant amount of energy. And here is another challenge that is consistent through the industry. The ESS system is owned by the public utility. The batteries were manufactured by LG Chem. The ESS was designed by an integrator named Fluence. It was maintained by a separate contractor called Sturgeon, who was a contractor to the integrator. So you can already start to see the various layers that are involved with the design, the building, the commissioning, and the ownership, the maintenance of this facility. There were 27 racks of battery modules. In the earlier class, I gave some videos on battery testing that we've done at UL. There are 14 modules per rack. There were 28 pouch cells. So these cells can either come cylindrical, like think of a AA battery, like a fat AA battery, right? Kind of rolled up like this. Or they can come in a pouch. And these pouches are similar to the size of a sandwich bag. And it has an anode and a cathode. And it has basically a material separator that's trying to keep those separate apart. The HVAC systems were trying to keep the interior temperature around 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and it was also protected with the VESDA smoke detector system. This is a sensing system, basically, like we'll call a sniffer, and it's there to detect an early failure, an early indication of smoke. It wasn't required to by code, and I want to be clear about that. This building was commissioned in 2012, and if you were in a class earlier, we didn't have much in our code until the 2015 edition of the fire code, 18 edition of the fire code, really looking at lithium-ion batteries. It was also protected with the NOVEC 1230 total flooding clean agent suppression system. And the design of this system is 30 seconds after that VESDA system detects an alarm or goes into alarm mode, it will activate this fire suppression system, which is this clean agent. It's like a gas. And it's, the idea is to smother the flame, not to allow enough oxygen for combustion. The timeline is very critical to understanding what our members went through at this incident. At 16:54:30, so these systems have a battery management system attached to them. That battery management system is continuously monitoring the battery system itself and the interior of that structure. It's measuring voltage, it's measuring power levels, it's measuring temperature, it's there, and it's reporting back. Typically, it's reporting back to that maintenance contractor. And if there's some type of fault, it'll send a signal to that contractor, and they'll respond and determine if this is an emergency, if it's maintenance. Not every fault has to go to the fire alarm system, right? That's the job of that contractor. But at 16:54:30, the BMS started to sense that there was a voltage drop in rack 15. At 16:54:44, air temperatures within the structure started to increase rapidly. Very shortly after, at 16:55:20, the VESDA smoke detector system registered an alarm condition, and all breakers and contactors were open. Shortly after that, air temperature measurements peaked at about 121.6 Fahrenheit. 30 seconds after that VESDA system went into activation mode, the VESDA, or I should say the suppression system, the NOVEC 1230, was discharged into the structure. And that 30-second delay is there in case there's a contractor inside the structure, right? You don't want to unknowingly trap someone in that structure. So you give 30 seconds for anyone inside to effect egress. But in that time frame here, no notification went to the fire department. So we're talking that the initial indication of a problem was at 16:54. At 17:41, almost an hour later, Phoenix Metro Dispatch received a call for smoke and a bad smell near an electric substation. This was a person that was walking their dog that reported white smoke and a bad smell in the area. The initial call went to Surprise, Arizona Fire Department, which is not too far away. It's up the street. And so it's not a bad long response. This is brush fire season, so initially they figured it was a brush fire. They put in their brush fire PPE and initiated response. Again, there was no communication from the fire alarm system to Metro Dispatch. At 17:44, all communication with the ESS system was lost by the contractor. At this point in time, they notified Phoenix Fire that they may have an issue, but they were already en route. At 17:48, Surprise, Arizona Fire Department arrived on the scene with engine 304, brush response 304, and tower 304. When they arrived, you can kind of see what they saw right here. If you look on the left, that's how the facility is situated. You can see there's an electrical substation next to it. There's pretty much desert and brush around it. There's an access road there. And it's kind of on a weird angle. It's set at a diagonal. Just northeast is a main four-lane road. These were the conditions that they saw upon their arrival. They took a picture, and you can see you have a cinder block wall there. You have a gated area around the ESS, and that gate was locked. The representative from the maintenance contractors was there to greet them. For some reason, he did not have a key to the outside gate. He had a key to the structure, but not the outside gate. At that time, he informed the captain of the engine company they were transitioning to structural PPE because they realized it wasn't a brush fire, that they were dealing with a battery energy storage system facility, and that they were dealing with lithium-ion batteries. As I mentioned, they didn't even realize the structure was there, let alone the type of technology that they were using. The captain initiated a 360-degree size-up and determined that the hot zone would be inside the gated area there. The contractor requested access to the building. The captain denied him that. As he was doing his 360, as he was coming around the seaside, he found the contractor at the side door trying to get in, and he immediately got him away from the scene. He realized that he had had some training, that he had white smoke, it was a battery facility, he had lithium-ion batteries. He requested a second alarm, an upgraded alarm, including a hazmat response. At that point in time, Surprise Hazmat's team was on a separate emergency. So the mutual response dispatched Peoria Fire Department's hazmat team. And I just want to point out that this hazmat team, when we sat and talked to them, and even though this was 6 months later, this is the first time that they sat down as a group and really started to discuss this incident. And it was pretty powerful, actually, going through it. But this captain, Hunter Clare from Peoria Fire Department, was very aggressive in his training. They had had a fire in a EV repair shop, an unlicensed EP repair shop, the year before, so they had a little bit of experience dealing with lithium-ion battery fires. He understood that he needed more, so he was very aggressive in going out, looking for online training, looking for in-person training to prepare himself and his crew for these response. So immediately during response, he instructed his crew to start to conduct some research online, looking up response to battery fires, response to lithium-ion battery fires. So at 1818, at the meantime, Surprise relocated their apparatus pretty much to the north side, or up the road, north of the building, upwind. When Peoria Fire Department's hazmat team arrived, this is kind of the situation that they saw. They saw this white haze, like a white vapor, emanating from the building and kind of coming out into the desert. It hung close to the ground, so it was cool, but it just came kind of floating out of the building. Immediately, the captain decided to do a 360. He grabbed his thermal imaging camera. They grabbed multiple multi-gas meters and started to conduct their 360. They entered the hot zone, which was inside the fenced-in area, and you can see them in the picture on the right as they're going down. And they were assessing the structure with their thermal imager, but also taking readings with their gas meters. Immediately on entering that hot zone with the vapor area, their gas meters pegged out on hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide, which is not a surprise when we see what we're seeing with our battery testing. We know we have high levels of carbon monoxide, 32% will be carbon monoxide, 36 to 37% will be hydrogen, so we know that's present. Their thermal imager camera was not registering elevated temperatures on the structure except for one small rectangular area between the first two HVAC systems, and that was relatively close to where Rack 15 would have been located. So they had a small rectangular area, I'm trying to remember if it read, I think 130 degrees. So as you can see, this took a period of time. They went back, they started to engage representatives from the various industries that were involved. They spoke with the contractor on site. At this point in time, APS had issued representatives to the site, or dispatch representatives to the site. They talked to the designer, and the designer was telling them that there's no way that their gas reading or gas meters were getting those readings. No, there was no way. So the crew went in and conducted a second 360 degree. And again, anytime they went near that vapor, the gas meters would ping out. But what they also saw with the thermal imaging camera is that temperature on the side of the building started to decrease. They again consulted with industry representatives. They consulted as a command staff, and they were coming to a conclusion that, the vapor was starting to ebb in the amount of vapor that was coming out of the building. There was some disagreement. We talked to representatives from the utility. I want to, thank them for their participation, giving us access to the site and being able to engage with them from their perspective. There was some miscommunication maybe, or misunderstanding. The fire department felt that they were being pressured to turn this situation over to the utility didn't feel like they were applying that pressure. So sometimes perception can be reality, right? But the fire department, the command staff got together, and after a third 360, they recognized that vapor seemed to have ceased to come out of the structure. They did not have an elevated temperature on the side. They also realized that they couldn't stay there for 24 hours. So they decided that they were going to take two courses of action, or one course with two options. They would conduct another 360. They would gain entry to the door on the B side. They wanted to do the C side, but they didn't have a key to that door. They had a key to the B side door. So they would open that door and they would assess conditions. They would take gas readings and they would use their thermal imaging camera to assess conditions on the interior of the structure. If they saw open flaming, they would retreat and let the fire burn out. They would just let it consume the structure. If they saw no open flaming, if they saw no rapid fire buildup, they would continue to ventilate and then continue to assess when they may be able to turn the structure over to the utility. You can see here someone was actually taking a video of this. And the video, unfortunately, he got a phone call right before capturing the event. But you can see the Peoria hazmat team starting to deploy to the B side. You can see the captain, he has his thermal imaging, he has his gas meter. They're laying out a charge tan line and they're approaching the structure. Now, if you remember our time frame, the first recognition of a problem was around 1654. The response was 1741. We're at almost 2,000 hours, really. And so we had been on the scene for quite a period of time. You can see right here with the picture, the hazmat team opening that door. And what they did is when they opened the door, they used the they used the multi-gas meter to start to take readings within the structure. As he opened the door, the white vapor started to cascade out the door. And you can see it's about waist level, it comes out, and again, it kind of starts to dissipate into the desert. These gas meters can take up to a minute to get a solid reading. So the captain was there trying to get his reading. At no time did he step into the structure. He lowered his head and looked into the structure, and he was looking for a rapid fire buildup. He then grabbed his thermal imaging camera, and he set it in the structure. He did not see open flaming. He didn't see any rapid heat rise. In fact, he recalls a reading of about 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And he remembered visibility improving because he saw the top of a red globe, as he would say, which turned out actually to be the container for the clean agent system, the Novec 1230. But approximately 3 minutes after opening that door, there was an explosion, deflagration. It's a fine line that we're trying to define right here. The Surprise, Arizona Fire Departments had moved upwind, so they were north of the structure, and the structure was kind of blocking their direct visual of the team. But they heard this loud explosion, and they reported they could visually see a jet of flame shoot into the desert 75 feet and approximately 25 feet in height. The captain had been standing in that doorway, and as you can see, there's a chain link fence right there. That captain was projected underneath that chain link fence to this spot at the top left in the desert, approximately 75 feet. You can see some of his equipment laying in the desert. In fact, he said to us, he goes, I remember telling the guy on the tip, if you see fire, put water on fire. Now, the Surprise, Arizona firefighters immediately called for a mayday, immediately called for an upgraded alarm, and they responded on foot. And they reported when they came around the corner, all 4 firefighters were down, unconscious, with their pass devices activated. And the firefighter who was on the tip recalled to us that when he woke up, he looked around, he remembered he was told, put water on the fire, so he started directing water on the first fire he saw. And that fire was the bush and his captain. At no point in time was water applied inside this structure. If you see on the right, the engineer who was standing just to the left of the captain had also been projected underneath that chain link fence, and he landed approximately 35 feet out into the desert. So the bottom right, you see underneath that chain link fence, you see bits of their PPE that was literally torn off them as they went underneath that fence. In fact, we believe that Hunter hit that steel post a little bit because he suffered a fractured clavicle, suffered numerous injuries, including internal injuries, brain injury, and more. On the left, you can see that green mass that's laying against that fence is the steel door frame. And when you went and saw this in person, it's heavier than I am. I mean, geez. I mean, this thing is pretty darn heavy, and it literally just blew it off and deformed it and twisted it. And on the opposite side, on the C side, we don't have a picture of it, there had been a fiberglass step ladder just inside the door. And it was thrown out the door because the C-side door was also blown off, and the bottom half had been burned off. Yet no additional fire progressed. It was that simple, and it was over. If you look at the structure, when I said, take a look at that first picture of the structure, this structure now is a steel frame structure that is bowed out. That was the pressure that was created by this deflagration. So as I mentioned, our goal here wasn't to lay blame. Our goal isn't to lay fault. Our goal is to identify contributing factors and maybe develop some recommendations moving forward that we can learn from this event. Hopefully educate our members, educate industry, right? So we don't have a duplicate event. Some of the contributing factors that we identified right away is that the core hazmat training curricula for first responder and technician level didn't address ESS hazards, nor did the extracurricular training. And we know that crew had been very aggressive in seeking this training. The problem is that there's not a lot of reliable training based on full-scale testing with ESS systems. These are very, very expensive tests to conduct. And typically, if industry is going to get a certification, whether it's a UL, whether it's an Intertech, or any other independent laboratory, they own that information. They don't necessarily want to share their failures out in the public domain. You know, we don't blame them, right? But it's hard for us to develop this training material based on small-scale testing because it's very inconsistent with these battery failures. You can fail 100 different cells and have 100 different results, even though you're using the same manufacturing cell. So it's hard to reliably build that up or calculate that up in a computer module. We don't want training based on maybes. We think that's what happened. We think this is what's going to happen, right? So really some of our recommendations is that not only should this training be developed for that advanced firefighter or technician level, it really needs to go to every firefighter, officer, and hazmat training and really emphasize the potential explosion hazard, vapor cloud formation, dispersion, and the dynamics of deflagration. We teach BLEVI in our academies, but we really don't get into explosion hazards, dust cloud or vapor cloud formation, and the dynamics of deflagration. We need to conduct research into the full-scale testing in order to develop this training. And until definitive tactics can be developed, we're recommending a very cautious approach, right? What's your life safety hazard? What's your explosion or exposure hazard? You know, are you in the middle of the desert? Can you let it burn? Are you in a populated area? And I'll get to it here in a minute with Queens. You know, those will present different challenges and different, different concerns. We believe this tool not only needs to be developed for in-person training, but online. We have to give access to all of our firefighters because who's going to be the first one on the scene? You know, if we recommend every battery fire that comes in has to have a hazmat response, that's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge. And this education has to go to industry too, because it was very, very clear during that incident, industry was looking to the fire service to be the subject matter expert, yet the fire service was looking to industry for input as they're developing what their tactics should be, what their approach should be, right? And as Bobby Reese, the chief of Peoria, says, if there's an uneducated industry representative on the scene, they may be more of a hindrance than a help in this scenario. So, and I think industry recognizes that too. In our discussions with the industry, they recognized that they needed to up their game, especially as it came to training. The ESS did not include sensors that provided information about the presence of flammable gases. Basically, these teams were operating absolutely blind in what was going in that structure, what was going on in that structure, what the gas accumulation was, what the stratification of those gases in that structure was. So some of our recommendations, a couple of them would be that lithium ESS should incorporate gas monitoring that could be accessed remotely. Research that includes multi-scale testing should be conducted to evaluate the effectiveness and limitations of stationary gas monitoring systems. These are not easy solutions. These are very challenging solutions because battery fires are very sooty fires, very, very dirty fires, and they immediately clog up these sensors. In fact, we had to develop, we call it a sneezing button, that every 2 minutes we had to hit the sneezing button and blow out those sensors so we can constantly monitor in these tests that we're doing what those gas levels are and what the concentrations are. So they're not easy solutions, but they are recommendations that we need to work harder on developing. The ESS communication system failed early in the incident. Again, they were operating blind, but our recommendation is that they should be more robust to ensure the communication remains uninterrupted through a conservative estimate of the duration. Here's 2 parts. Do we need to reinforce this? Do we need to go into NFPA 72 and start to require more robust performance of the electrical components within that BMS? And the answer is probably yes, right? But then the secondary question is, what is the information that the fire service needs during this incident? Right? We don't need to know the proprietary information of that battery system because industry is monitoring some of that. And to be fair to them, some of that information is proprietary that we'd had no value with. But there are value points that we need to have from the fire service perspective that would help us operate safer on the scene. The emergency plan was not provided to the responding fire service personnel prior to the incident. And once it was provided, it was inadequate. So recommendations are owners and operators of the ESS should develop an emergency operations plan in conjunction with the local fire service personnel. This is what we thought was a critical point. There is no record of APS sharing an emergency plan with Surprise, Arizona. Once they provided it during the event, it was a 1-page plan. And even if they had that prior to the incident, I don't see them changing anything they did. In fact, they may have opened the door much earlier. And as I'll mention later, we don't know if that would have been better or worse at this point. What we are recommending is that this emergency plan needs to be developed with that local jurisdiction. That local jurisdiction has differences in response capabilities from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. What FDNY may have available, what Miami-Dade may have available, may not be available in Findlay, Ohio. And so you may have to develop that response plan accordingly to that local jurisdiction. Did I get ahead of myself? Oh yeah, one of the other things, the signage that identifies the contents of the ESS should be required on all ESS installations. Again, not only did they not know that building was there, they didn't realize they were dealing with lithium ion until the contractor informed them that. So we believe that this signage should be retroactive. Very few things in our fire code are retroactive, but we believe this is one of those that should. And it should apply to all occupancies. Even while we were conducting this investigation, NFPA 855, which is the installation of energy storage systems, was having discussions on their modifications. And industry representatives were there trying to convince them that these requirements should not apply to public utility buildings because they're unoccupied buildings. Well, the problem is they may be unoccupied on a daily basis, but when an event occurs, now the fire service responds. As far as I'm concerned, that's an occupied building as we start to operate. The ESS did not have deflagration venting panels per NFPA 68 or adequate explosion mitigation to prevent the accumulation of explosive gases per NFPA 69. And the total flooding agent likely contributed to the deflagration. And it's important to note that 3M, which is the manufacturer of Novec 1230, 3M made it clear that Novec 1230 was not an appropriate suppression agent. It did not have enough information or technical justification behind it to demonstrate that it would perform in this type of application. Right? What it did is it had an 8%, 7 to 8% saturation within that structure, but because of the leakage of that structure, over time, that starts to seep out. And as it settles down, it caused a stratification. So you had a non-combustible layer down here that was mixed with the Novec 1230 that was stopping open flaming, but it wasn't stopping the thermal runaway within the battery and the propagation of failure within the cells. So you still had elevated temperatures, you still had sparking, you just didn't have open flaming. But then you had a separation, the lighter gases, the flammable gases, was above that stratification line. So we believe when they opened that door, it brought that stratification line, boom, down to that ignition level. So two of our recommendations are that the ESS should incorporate adequate explosion prevention protection as required by the standards. Now, again, I want to make clear, when this building was commissioned and brought online, they were not required to do deflagration or explosion mitigation. They didn't understand the hazard with the lithium-ion battery. And I don't think any of us really did, really, right? It was when we started to develop and doing higher level tests, we really started to recognize this explosion hazard with the accumulation of hydrogen gases. So this research needs to include full-scale testing to conduct or to determine the most effective fire suppression and explosion prevention hazards. Again, when we start to look at full scale, we have to do large scale testing to identify, do we have a clean agent in the marketplace that can help prevent this deflagration? If we're going to use sprinklers, what is the sprinkler flow? Is it 0.3 gallons per minute? Is it 0.5 gallons per minute and such? Another additional recommendation is that after this event, that building was filled with stored energy. There was no plan to decommission that building. So really APS had to work with their stakeholders, with LG Chem and others, and they had to identify, how are we going to de-energize this building? Because there was no real way to gauge whether those other batteries were at risk of spontaneous thermal runaway, right? So they had to develop a plan, which took about 2 months, and where they had to remove every single module one at a time and start to de-energize it on site. Now, in Arizona, in the middle of the desert, as you can see there, that was fine. They set up some tents to do that, right? But if you're in Queens, New York, in an area with pedestrians between a bowling alley and a church and preschool, you have other challenges there. Would that same decommissioning method apply there, especially in wintertime? And the answer is probably not. So you need to have a decommissioning plan prior to even being commissioned. And that was actually incorporated into 855. So as with many of our projects in FSRI, we developed, the goal of this was to develop a training program. And we have. It's a 1-hour training program. It looks at the incident, goes through the incident. You see there, that's Captain Hunter Clare from Peoria. And he gets to tell a story, right? So that was one of our goals. We wanted to make sure that their story was told. And their story was told and that it was accurate, right? Because there were certainly revisionist memories that were going on from those outside of the direct incident. And this is a way for us to carry that forward. Is there a hazard in the marketplace? Well, yeah, we are seeing failures, right? We have seen failures in the UK and Liverpool. We've seen a failure in France. In South Korea, they experienced failures in 27 energy storage systems, to the point that the South Korean government shut down all energy storage systems until the design flaw could be identified. And last year, we had a failure of an ESS system in Beijing, which led to the loss of 2 firefighters. And so it's a challenge, and the challenge within this area with lithium-ion batteries has led UL to develop UL 9548, which is actually a fire test. We want to understand what happens to that battery when it fails. We want to gather that data, gather that information, so we can design, not necessarily UL, the manufacturer's responsibility. They can design an appropriate fire protection system for that specific installation. And also, we can take this information and develop educational materials for our firefighters, so they are informed when they arrive on the scene. As I mentioned, we have some restrictions in the code, but these restrictions in maximum allowable quantities, separation requirements, you can get around them simply by doing tests, right? But that test plan has to be approved by the authority having jurisdiction, that local authority. So while the manufacturer can come to UL or Intertech or another independent laboratory and conduct these tests, for them to go over the maximum allowable quantities of 50 kilowatt hours or reduce that 3-foot separation, they have to come to you for approval. So this is really critically important that we, as a fire service, are engaged in our permitting process locally. Who's the one that's approving these installations? Are they appropriately educated enough to understand what they're reading in that test report and to assess what that test report is telling them and the consistency of that test report? And then engage the fire department and say, hey, listen, over at 123 Main, you have a 600 kilowatt system in there. So there are challenges out there, and we have on the IFF site, we have a couple of videos talking about lithium ion batteries. One we did from Redmond. We have an educational video on 9540A. At UL FSRI, we have the Arizona incident review available for you. We subsequently, and I don't have time to get to it, but we subsequently, Steve Kerber funded some additional testing, not directly reflective of Arizona, but there are a lot of similarities to what we saw in Arizona, where we conducted testing in a shipping container. No fire protection system. We deployed Novec 1230, and also where we deployed sprinklers. I just want to show one video, if I can. So in every one of these tests, we saw a deflagration. This was with no protection, and it actually was strong enough to open those doors, those container doors. When we used Novec 1230, we also saw a deflagration. You can see there. Those deflagration panels are designed that if you have an overpressurization, they open up, and that starts to channel the effects of that deflagration. And keep in mind, when you go to install these structures, right, and industry's looking for deflagration or explosion mitigation, you not only have to think about the installation of today, but you have to the installation tomorrow. In Arizona, they were surrounded by a desert. But when you went back to the firehouse, in the next 5 years, that was all going to be developed as residential. So if you have a horizontal deflagration panel installed, is that going to still be applicable 5 years from now when you may have pedestrian traffic? In Queens, New York, if you have horizontal deflagration, what if some lady's walking her dog past that thing when it decides to fail, right? So you have to look at the strategies, and even in sprinkler systems, we saw deflagration occurrences. So again, that kind of carries us through that. I want to be respectful of time. We have a lot of challenges forward, but we are actively working with numerous stakeholders, especially with the IFF and UL and FSRI, to not only understand this phenomenon, but bring that information to you. We just initiated a grant from the Department of Energy looking at residential ESS installation in a garage, and what we want to do is develop tactical considerations to give it to you, so you can identify if you're responding to a garage fire, hey, this is no typical garage fire. I may have an ESS or an EV or both in that garage, and what are the implications to you and your tactical considerations. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, Rick, I'll turn it over to you, and we'll go from there.
And thank you, Sean. Any questions for Sean? No? Yeah, I know. I'll try to run through all these things and go to a dark screen for you. So what I'd like to do now is bring on an event and a story that is kind of fresh in a lot of people's minds, and bring on some folks that have, who were there, who were the ones that first on scene. On Thursday, June 24th, 2021, at approximately 1:25 in the morning, the Champlain Towers South, a 12-story beachfront condominium in Miami, in a Miami suburb of Surfside, partially collapsed, and it killed 98 people, all in total. Today, we're very lucky to have 3 folks who were part of the initial response. And what I'd like to do is bring up the president of Local 1403, Billy McAllister, and the 3 firefighters that we're going to be telling their stories. And if you guys can join us up here on stage, and President McAllister will introduce and also provide a bit of a intro to the scene.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick, and thank you to the International for inviting us just a few short months after this occurrence. After discussing the content and the structure of this event, we decided this portion of the workshop would be an unscripted dialogue. No slides. We've all seen the photos and the images that were streamed around the world as these members and countless others worked alongside one another in Surfside. That day will come. There's quite a bit of research that is ongoing. There's going to be enough content that you could fill a conference. I thought it was appropriate that today, this is one big kitchen table. We can talk, we can share some experiences, and hopefully give a bit of insight into how to better deal with this if you were to encounter it once you go back home. Complicated incidents are an assemblage, responding to and understanding complicated incidents are an assemblage of each firefighter's viewpoint and experience from where they're standing at the moment they arrive. No one fully understands, nor can they fully comprehend the enormity or the magnitude of the events as they're unfolding until well after they've finished the response. We each show up with a job to do, with the crews we were assigned with, on an apparatus with specific equipment to help us accomplish that job. We rely upon our training and our experiences and one another to get that job done. And that's exactly what 1403 members did on June 24th. The collapse of a multi-story building in a sleepy seaside town started out sounding routine enough. It was a fire alarm ringing in the middle of the night. It was anything but that upon arrival. The fire alarm was ringing. Indeed, it rang for several days, but the reason wasn't a false alarm. It was the largest building collapse in Miami's history, and it was the biggest we've seen in the United States in decades. It was the very definition of a high-risk, low-frequency event. This short segment today that's about to transpire over the next 45 minutes or so could indeed fill a week-long conference, but that's for another time. We've chosen to narrow the focus to just one idea, to a single theme. We want to give all IAF members a window into what each one of us saw and experienced, and it's our sincerest hope that if, God forbid, when you return home and you ever respond to such an incident, you'll be responding with a little bit of the experience we give you today, and that may keep you just a bit safer, and you may be able to help your community survive that event. So I'd like to start out by introducing the three individuals to my side, my brothers and sisters. I have Jen Curlin. She was the lieutenant on the first driving ladder that evening. To her right is Dave Bell, a firefighter on one of our technical rescue engines. And at the far end of the table was Chris Ackerman, a battalion chief that arrived the morning after when the sun broke. So we'll start with Jen Curlin, and she can explain to us what she was dispatched to, what she saw when she arrived, and how she took the equipment that she responded with the crew that she had with her, and started to take this challenge on one piece at a time. Jen?
All right, you'll have to excuse me. I'm sorry, Billy. I'm sorry, everybody. This is the first time I've talked publicly about this call, and it's hard. I've been dealing with the aftermath of the long-range PTSD of going to a stupid alarm ringing at a pain-in-the-butt building that alarm goes off all the time, especially in the morning. So just give me a second. I had it together. It's all good. Thank you. March, it'll be 22 years I'm on the department. I got on U-Star very early on by getting a dog. That's how you get on, they tell you. So I've got a lot of experience with technical rescue. I'm a technical rescue lieutenant as well. I left my TRT truck to go work out on the beach on the tower ladder because I was done doing technical rescue calls. I just couldn't go to one more horrible call when they're calling you because everything's gone bad. So it's a regular shift. I have my bid-in driver. He's awesome, Chris Diaz. He's been on 26 years. My tailboard, Brian, 20 years. My other tailboard, Gabby, 1 month off probation. Just went back into that truck the shift before because it had been broken, like it is a lot because we beat the heck out of it. Alarm comes in, 1:18 in the morning, Champlain South, engine 76, is a little closer than us. We both go to this call, and regular morning, I'm thinking, oh, why is he not canceling me? Goodness gracious. On the way, one of the guys in the back is like, hey, update's coming. They're saying explosion. And I'm looking at the notes on the computer, and I see some notes that don't make sense. And I'm like, oh, guys, this might be something. Maybe it's a boiler explosion, which we have out in the high rises out on the beach. Frequently, I work Sunny Isles, Bow Harbor, and Surfside in the Bay Harbor Islands. Mostly high rise. So as we're going, we go across the bridge, across Hollover Inlet, cruising up to Bow Harbor, almost to Surfside, and the dispatcher comes across the air with a attention, low hazard building collapse, which I don't know what's low hazard about a building collapse at all. And all of us are perplexed, and she starts rattling off a lot of units, and I see engine 76 up the street, turning that corner onto 88th. And he breaks in, I don't know if anybody's heard the audio, and he breaks in engine 76, priority. Arrival, this isn't a garage, this is a whole building. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, oh shit. And my guys go, he said oh shit on the radio. And I said, yeah, he did. So, a minute later, we turn the corner, not even a minute, maybe 30 seconds, turn the corner, and I turned to the back to Gabby and Brian, and I said, guys, oh shit is right. Taff saying on the radio, stop short, and I'm like, of course I'm gonna stop short. I'm not getting any closer to that building. What's left standing looks like it's leaning. There's dust everywhere. People running all over the place. The cops were running around like chickens with their heads cut off. People all over the street screaming, the alarm going off. My guys are like, what are we gonna do? I go over there, I tell them, go over with 76. You need to go and evacuate that hotel that's to the north, the Bravo Explosion, which is just across the street. So we're stopped short at the light, and I look up, and I see all these people up on the balconies, and they're all screaming at us, please come get us, help us. And there's a guy on my right, and he's like, hey, my mom's up there, and I see her, and she's up on the 11th floor. I know I can't reach her with my ladder. It's only 100 feet. And he's on the phone with her, and I tell him, hey, tell her to try to break through an interior wall, see if she can get south, because I could see what used to be there. It's this big, there's 3 of the same buildings. It's a big, like U, and only the front part's there. This big pile of rubble. I'm the only TRT, USAR person on scene. I know how bad it is. I know that I have to focus on my tactics. My tactics is not USAR, it's not TRT, it's I have a ladder. And there's people on balconies stuck. So it was very hard as a first arriving officer to try to coordinate my emotions and calm down and slow down my brain. Battalion chiefs start flying in. I don't know, they drove like 120 miles an hour. Vicky Bird gets there, hazmat, TRT chiefs. Cop comes up to me before they get there, oh, what do we do? And I was like, set a perimeter, over there, over there, over there. And he's like, okay, and he ran, and Dave said later on they didn't want to let him in because I said, nobody gets in. And they held those guys to it. So go down the street, I see this girl there, she's petrified, young black girl, covered in dirt. And I'm like, you work here? And she's like, yeah, I was a security guard. I said, how many people are in the building? She's like, I don't know, I just started. And she's shaking like a leaf, she's pale. And I ask her, do you have any information on your phone? And she holds it up, and she goes, well, a rock hit it, and her whole phone was smashed in her hand. And I was like, well, how many things? So I said, think about apartments. More chiefs are arriving. I hear sirens are coming. So I walk over to where the battalion went, over on the south side, which is the Alpha Delta corner across the street. And I'm looking up, and I'm calculating what I want to do in my head. So now I've got 3 chiefs, and I decide, you know what? I have the tower ladder. We're going to go post up Alpha Bravo corner and start picking people up off the balconies because they're screaming, they're yelling. I'm asking, hey, can you get out? Can you go inside? Can you find a way out? And every single one of those people said, no, the neighbors aren't there, meaning the entire building is gone. Some of them could see out and could see the ocean, or could see that what used to be a door across the way was no longer there. Formulate a plan, go back to my crew, say, hey guys, this is what we're gonna do. Is everybody good with this? And they're like, yeah. Tell Brian we're gonna go in the bucket. Gabby, my brand new rookie, you're my spotter. You gotta stay on the ground. Make sure nobody comes and takes stuff of our truck. Don't let anybody close to the truck. Keep your head on a swivel. If I need resources, if I need a backboard, I need something, I'm gonna have to yell because there's so much traffic on the radio. Nobody could say anything. So we post up, and I think it was probably 40 minutes, but it seems like an instant of it happened so fast. We just start balcony, 2nd floor, 2 ladies, a guy, and a labradoodle. That was 2nd and 3rd floor, 2 picks, brought them down. I need water. The smell, the acrid air, it was so full of just dust and glass. Couldn't breathe, my mouth was dry. 4th floor, there's a lady standing there, and I'm like, how many people are in your apartment? Are there any neighbors that can come? She's like, no, it's me and my mother. She's an invalid, she's on hospice. And I was like, oh, great. So me and Brian are there in the bucket. I was like, rock, paper, seniority. No, you're bigger than me. So right there on the 4th floor, there's this huge crack in the building that we saw when we pulled up, and the guys, they know, Dave knows the crack. Brian's like, just watch that crack. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna watch it. And they're like, hurry up, the building's moving, and everybody's screaming and yelling and crying and still, and I could hear them up there, and I'm like, we're coming, your turn. So the lady, you know, I'm like, how many people, where's your mom? Oh, she's back here, and it's like this L, so the living room's there, and the bedroom's there, and she goes inside, and she closed the sliding glass door. And I was like, hey, Brian, where'd she go? And he's like, I don't know, I'm gonna go and get this lady. So she comes out, and she goes, and she brings me a bag. Oh, here's a rolly bag. So I give the rolly bag, and okay, whatever, put it in the bucket. That's her medications. I said, okay. Oh, good, but what? And she goes inside, and she shuts the door again. And I was like, well, oh my gosh, this lady. So then she comes out, she goes, oh, and here's her clothes. I said, okay. So I put the bag up, that's fine. And then she goes in and she shuts the door again in my face. So then she came out, and I F-bombed her to death. I said, stop closing the door. She's like, but my cat's inside. And I was like, okay. So she comes out, brings me another piece of luggage, hands me a dog. Brian comes, hands me the mom. She's welded like a V because she's a hospice patient. We stuff her in the bucket. We get the lady in. We go down. We get her off. Then we go next. We just do that one after another after another. 11 people, 2 dogs. We get up to the 9th floor, and I look down, and I see the division chief, Horatio. I look down, I was like, oh, there's Horatio, and he throws his hands up in the air because he's squawking on the radio, you're in the collapse zone. And I'm like, I know I'm in the collapse zone, Horatio, I'm fully aware. He says, oh, you know, you gotta move your truck. And I look over and I see there's another lady on a balcony, and I know I can't reach her. I tell my guys, we're gonna be 5 feet short, but let's go over there and let's tell her we're coming. So I'm like on the radio, yeah, I got this one lady, we're gonna grab her, and then we'll get out of the collapse zone, no problem. So we go up, and the bucket comes, and whoop, it's 5 feet short. I'm glad I practiced. I know my distances. And I said, hi, how you doing? What's your name? She says, hi, I'm Colita. I said, hi, Colita, would you like to get off this balcony? She's like, yes. And I said, can you jump? She said, nope. I said, okay. You see this far? I got to move the truck. I said, so we're going to move the truck, and we'll come back. And she says, I'll wait right here. I said, okay. So I tell the guys, Horatio's gonna be really pissed. So let's bed this truck as fast as possible. I'm gonna go down, I'm gonna slow walk over to Horatio and talk to him and smooth things over and let him know. So by the time I get back over here, I want the truck positioned so we can go and grab this lady. They're like, fine. And they moved so fast like worker bees, strolling over to Horatio. Hey, what's up? He's like, oh, you done? I said, well, about that. I said, you see the lady up there, and she's leaning over the balcony, and she's doing this like she's landing a helicopter or something. I see that. I said, that's Colita. I said I'd come back, and she says, I'll wait right here. And he groaned at me. He's like, oh, you got 5 minutes. I said, we'll be done in 3. I promise. I do not want to be on that building any more than I have to. So we go up, get her in, put the ladder back, go to rehab. Then they're asking for another ladder, and they know that we're in rehab, but because there's so many units at this time, I think it was probably 2 hours into the call, the engineers had showed up. Dave will talk about that, and they were doing their interior search. So then we were supposed to set up and help with getting the other people who are non-ambulatory that were still trapped in the Alpha Delta part of this building.
Let me jump in. I want to ask. So 17 people in a span of minutes.
Well, 12 people and 12 people, 2 dogs in 20 minutes, and then the 5 with the help of TRT.
Talk a bit about that continual reevaluation of risk benefit, right? You initially, the entire Alpha side facing Collins was filled with people. Go through that process as you removed everybody when you reevaluated the risk and the benefit and when it was time to move out and away from the building.
The risk-benefit analysis is something I've taken very seriously as an officer, and I've been a lieutenant for about 16 years now, almost 17. And it's something I do on every single call, no matter how stupid it is. And this was the call that we as a crew talked about. This is it. We knew that this building was coming down. I knew as a TRT officer, as a USAR person, the building was coming down, but with that many people screaming and yelling and telling me, and everyone had the same story, they cannot get out. We have to get them. I'm not gonna go park my 100-foot ladder across the street and wait for somebody to come by and tell me it's safe, because it's not safe. It's inherently unsafe, and that was the day that we were all gonna die, and I accepted that. I accepted that God put me there to do what I could in a short period of time, and every time we made a pick and we put them on the ground, look up at the building, look at that crack, reassess. Everyone good? Crew continually talking to each other. Everything was face to face because you couldn't even get on the radio. And it didn't matter anyway because we were just doing our own thing, hyper-focused on my task as an officer on a 100-foot platform truck. I never lost sight of my task. My task was very specific. I could do nothing on the pile in the back. I could see the pile of rubble. I knew there was people trapped because they kept yelling, hey, we got people back here. Not my task. It was very hard to not be distracted by all the stuff going on and all the other things, and not be distracted by 3 times on the radio, chief telling me I'm in the collapse zone, and I'm aware I'm in the collapse zone. And the risk versus benefit, we were willing to risk everything because I knew I had at least 12 viable victims that were there talking and begging and crying to get off the building. So we were continually reassessing, and as a crew, taking into consideration how they felt, that if they said they couldn't do it anymore or they didn't want to, then we could figure something else out. By that time, other assets had arrived, but because the streets are narrow, for them to actually get those assets close enough was really tough.
Thanks. I'm gonna pivot at the same time all of that was going on, Dave Bell will tell you that they were across town on Engine 46, and occasionally a ladder. I'm sorry, it's still a ladder. The exact same time everything you just heard went on, from another vantage point across town, they heard what was going on, and judging by what they heard and the experience they had and the equipment they carry on their unit, and knowing that they were going to be en route, they responded across town. And I'm going to now turn this to Dave so he can explain to you what their thoughts were as they listened to Jen Curlin and Taft Parker, their first driving captain, on scene, and their radio transmissions, what they thought as they prepared themselves to arrive, and then what he did in those first few minutes, both on the pile and then inside the building to rescue those that couldn't be reached from outside.
I've been on a ladder company I've actually been on the job for 23 years now. Been in the TRT Bureau for 20 of those years, and on the same ladder company for 16 years now. That night we were on an alarm ringing, and we heard the call go down. And as he was given the size up, he said the magical word, "It looks like 9/11. And a little closer? Okay. At that point, we just looked at each other, and unfortunately that night I had a relief captain, not my normal captain. So I had to kind of feed him a lot of information. We backed the truck up and we just started heading. It was a good 25-minute route. We had a lot of time to think about it. We heard a lot of things going on the radio. It was just complete chaos. By the time we got there, they had already a bunch of units staging, and unfortunately, with her telling the officers not to let us in, they tried to stop us. We pulled up, and it's hard to explain what we saw. It was just a giant pile. Dust still in the air. You could hardly see. Police officers were yelling at us that they had a viable victim up on the pile, which they just kind of pointed and kind of like over there. When we got closer, it was about 40 feet in the air. We got up there and we found Jonah. He was a 15-year-old kid who was trapped under a slab of concrete, which was about 20 by 30. It was just his arm that was trapped. He was standing there barefoot. He was sleeping in bed. We were limited on our tools. We brought some e-tools up there, some spreaders, a rescue jack, and with just those two tools, we were able to get his arm out. By that time, we had some backboards brought up there, and at that time, when we released his arm, I looked at this kid. He's barefoot. We're standing on this giant pile of rubble, rebar, and glass, and I picked the kid up and I threw him over my shoulder, carried him down the pile a little bit, and placed him on the backboard. At that time, there was other TRT crews on scene. They noticed his mom was pinned up underneath the slab a little further, and she was actually talking to us. So we spent the next hour and a half trying to lift this piece of concrete that was somewhat on an angle with a column that was underneath it, and she was between the slab and the column. Her lower extremities were pinned under there. We've all been on rubble piles, but usually the piles we're on have been settled for a while, so we have a good stable base where we can build some cribbing and get a good footing trying to lift something. We had nothing like that. Pipes and voids, and every time we tried to lift, it just wouldn't go. The floor kept collapsing out from underneath us. The only thing we had at one point was two e-spreaders. And what we ended up doing was on each side of this slab was just lift and lift. And every time we reset, she would scream, "Stop resetting, it hurts." We talked to her the whole entire time. By the time we could actually get enough cribbing up there and build a good foundation, we were using pieces of steel, pieces of concrete, anything we could find to build a platform. We got to the point where we couldn't lift it anymore. So what we ended up doing is I looked at my tailboard and I said, "Hey, are you willing to crawl into this thing and kind of dig out from underneath her feet and release a lot of the rubble?" And he did. He slid right up under there. And when I'm talking inches, we might have had a half an inch to 3/4 of an inch of the tips of the spreader actually holding this concrete up. It wasn't like we had a lot of bite. He went up under there, cleared the area, and pulled her out. As soon as we pulled her out, she stopped breathing. And it was hard, an hour and a half of working on somebody, and she decides, she didn't decide, but unfortunately, I think the crush syndrome got to her, and we did, at one point, talked about trying to start an IV and trying to start the protocol for crush syndrome, but I think our whole goal was just to get her out. At the same time we're working, we're hearing loud crashes, loud noises all around us. It was dark out, we couldn't see. By the time we had almost gotten her out, there was a lot of trucks coming on scene, they were lighting up the scene. We looked up at one point and there was giant air conditioners hanging off the building right above us. And that's what we were hearing was air conditioners falling off the roof. At that same time, other TRT units were scouting the pile. I mean, this pile is huge. You can't understand how big it is. It's just, to get from here to the back exit, you can walk there. It would take you 30 minutes to get over there, just trying to go up and down and around things. The other TRT unit found a mother and daughter up on the pile that, on the ninth floor, that actually just, we don't know how they survived.
They got up, they heard the mother and the daughter that was in apartment 909 had heard the initial pool deck collapse, and it
Yeah,
rustled them out of bed. Dad stayed in bed. They were out of the bedroom, which is why they survived.
Yeah, they wrote it down. My victim, Jonah, and his mom, they literally wrote it down all the way, almost like riding a surf. It was just a miracle how he survived. 19 grabbed the mother and daughter. They actually found a couple doors on the pile and used them as backboards, and then carried him down the pile. At that point, command decided it was unsafe and they needed to pull everybody off the pile. We spent a little bit more time. We tried to squeeze out as much as we can to do more searching, but everything was a pancake. I mean, there was no voids. Just like Jen was saying, it was just, like I said, we've been on rebel piles. We see the stuff we have on there. It's mostly garbage and bricks and steel. But when you start seeing baby diapers and pictures and personal items, we actually started focusing on mattresses, looking for mattresses and trying to look underneath them or look around them. We finally got pulled off the pile. We went into staging while command tried to figure out and come up with a plan of what we were actually going to do. And Jen had pulled everybody off the exterior of the Alpha side of the building, and they wanted to do an interior search. So they asked for volunteers, and of course, we're the stupid ones. We say, yeah, we're going in. And we actually had to go into the basement. And we were talking about it this morning. When we walked into the basement, as you approach the parking garage, the floor had already started doing this with a car on top of it. And we went in, we started walking in about 4 feet of water. We found a stairwell, and on the first floor of the stairwell, it had already separated from the concrete for about 2 inches. As we started going up the floors, we got up to about the 7th or 8th floor. We have pictures of the corner of the stairwell separated 6 to 8 inches off the wall. About the 9th floor, the actual floor started teetering. We got up to the floors, and we spent almost a good hour and a half searching every door, taking them down, cutting them. We actually brought our little portable Milwaukee saw, and we actually cut all the locks on the doors because they were solid 40-year-old doors. They weren't budging when we tried to hit them with a sledgehammer. We ended up pulling 3 more people out of that building. One guy was actually sleeping. And we opened the door, and he wanted to know what we were doing. Yeah, he thought it was the elevator. And then we brought him to the Alpha Delta side where you guys brought him down on the bucket. I can go on for a while. I was there for over 30 days. I actually was up for 3 days straight and then transitioned into USAR. So I never left. But it was a long time.
Thanks, Dave. This is just 2 of the stories of hundreds that were there that night before the sun broke in the morning. And every single individual, when you heard it on the radio, when you saw it in person, they were working in a different location with a different set of experiences, different apparatus with different equipment, all trying to solve this complicated problem. Not any one of us could have resolved any aspect of this, but little by little, over a period of about 30 days, it went from this extraordinary event to being able to have cleared the entire location of the rubble. What I want to pivot to next is, in this first couple of hours, there was an extraordinary amount of action and effort by everyone that arrived. But I think that the next important thing to move on to is the idea that you should continually reassess that risk-benefit. Obviously, in those first few minutes with so many people in uncertain circumstances, you're going to risk a lot to save a lot. But after the sun broke, Chris arrived, and as a battalion, it's his responsibility to take a look at this with fresh eyes and really assess where we are, where we were, and where we're going. So, Chris.
Sure. Chris Ackerman. It's my 23rd year in the fire service. I've been with Dade County for 18 now. I've been a chief for 6. In March, I got my dream bid. It's the technical rescue chief. There's 3 of us, so 1 on each shift. We have a battalion that we look after, and then we respond countywide with the technical rescue units to any calls that they get for their service. So I just started in that position in March, and I find that my job now as a chief, you know, we talk about the risk-benefit analysis. It's my job to do that analysis, and I'm the try to be the voice of reason, and be the one side of this analysis. And when I met Billy, we were firefighters on the same rescue company together, and we were on the opposite end of that spectrum. So hyper-aggressive, usually where we weren't supposed to be, but we were trying to do the right thing to get saves and get into the action. Where I find now my focus is on making sure that guys like we were don't get into trouble or don't lose sight of what's important. On this morning, I live about an hour from the firehouse, so I got up at 4:30. As I'm starting to shave and get ready for the day, I look at my email and I see there's an email that goes out every time we have a significant incident, large building fires, collapses, things like that. And I see a notification that I had never seen before. It said, significant event, building collapse. They're operating the incident on 2 different tactical channels. It says, you know, the main incident is on one TAC channel, and all of the special ops units are on a second TAC channel. And that's something that exists in policy but never really happens. So that was a first in my career that I had seen that. We have the ability to dial into a phone number and listen to the audio on whatever radio frequency you select. So that caught my attention, but I see that the notification came a few hours earlier. Man, you know, I wonder if there's going to be any conversation on that channel now. And as soon as I get to the channel, I start hearing discussion about ongoing searches. My God, like, what is this? You know, they're still making rescues 3 hours into the incident. Billy calls while I'm getting ready and says, "Hey, man, are you there?" "No, man, I'm at home. I'm getting ready. I'm heading in." You know, what is this? Well, you know, this is a significant building, a very large building. It's collapsed. I said, "Man, well, can you tell me anything about what is the cause?" As Jen discussed, we've had natural gas and boiler explosions. Terrorism was a consideration based on that area of town is in the news frequently for political reasons and things like that. So terrorism's not out of the question. And then sinkholes. In Florida, we have sinkholes occur pretty regularly. This building's right on the beach. Tides had been higher, I think, in that general time frame. So it's conceivable that there's a sinkhole under the building that caused a portion to collapse. So I had the unique opportunity to listen. I thought I was prepared for what I was going to encounter when I eventually got to the scene, because I was able to listen to the audio, you know, from the moment I woke up at 4:30 in the morning, all the way through my ride to work. When I got into the station, the guy that I was relieving was, of course, at the collapse, had been working with Dave that morning. So I knew that it was just an inevitability. I was going to be going to this collapse at some point. So I tried to do everything that I could to get the battalion ready to function, because I was going to be leaving and was likely not going to be back for the rest of the shift. So trying to hire the overtime to cover the spots that were going to be vacant, with all my gear piled up in the bay ready to go whenever a way for me to get to the scene arrived. One of the neighboring battalions picked me up. We stopped and picked up another oncoming battalion chief to take him to the scene to relieve somebody as well. All the while, I was thinking I was arriving to an incident that not was over, but had been stabilized, and was coming to just be there for the next however many days while we brought this to a conclusion, or transferred it to the federal USAR system and had them take over. When I arrived on the scene, though, I went to check in at the command post, and the incident commander, stops me before I enter the command bus that was there and says, "Hey, they're waiting for you. You need to go to the back corner of the building. Hurry up." And what could be so urgent? I thought I heard all the rescues be made and those kind of things over the radio. There was a gap in time once I arrived at work until I arrived at the scene that I wasn't able to pay attention to the radio and hear what was currently going on. When I get to the back, though, I enter a small command post that was in the back, and the guy that I'm relieving, the chief that I'm relieving, says, "Man, I'm so glad you're here. I didn't think I was ever getting relieved." Man, what's the big deal? "Hey, listen, we just found somebody. She's in the basement," and he starts describing this scenario to me that just makes no sense. She's underground, she's trapped, she's underwater, and we're going to need to climb on ladders to get there. Man, what are you talking about? So I said, "Listen, just your description isn't doing me any good. I need to see what you're talking about. Can you take me to the site?" He says, "Yeah." So I tell the division chief that I'm going to be reporting to, "Listen, I need 2 minutes to go see what this is." So I get dressed, and I follow him, up over this pool deck, down some ladders, and I have no other way to describe it other than to say it was a basement. It was actually a parking garage, but because of us having to enter from an elevated position, it looked like you were descending underground to get in here. As we did, we're climbing over rubble, crushed cars, that kind of thing, and sure enough, now we're standing in, water that's over knee deep. Hey, where are we going? We're going down there. So probably 200 feet into the building, sloshing through water. I arrived to find a group of guys that are there assembling Paratech struts to hold the ceiling up. Check in with the technical rescue captain that was there and said, "Hey man, what do you have?" And I don't want to say I'm skeptical, but like I said, my job now is frequently to look at when we're doing something that looks really hazardous. Many times there's a better way. I'm able to look at the situation and say, "Guys, hey, there's a safer way for us to do this," or "Do we really need to be here right now? Like guys, step back for a second, look at the risk benefit. Does it exist here? Does it justify us risking our lives for what the situation is?" And frequently the answer to that is no. So I'm almost interrogating these guys like, "Hey, I just climbed down a bunch of rubble into a basement that's full of water. There's a sheen of gasoline across the water, and there's multiple crushed electric vehicles that are all in this soup. Well, we can talk to somebody. There's a woman, we're talking to her through this wall." "Man, are you sure of that?" "Yes, we're absolutely sure. We've been speaking to her. She's telling us that she's there, and this is the only way in." I said, "Okay, what do you need?" "Well, I need extra technicians, I need chipping hammers, I need more lights." He gave me a list of things that they need to work in that space. And the two engineers from the USAR team were already there, and they were standing there watching the shoring operation get put together. It's the only time I'm happy that somebody told me what they did, because I don't think there was any way they could know this, but it helped for the rest of the day. So I said, are we okay to be here?" He goes, "Yes, absolutely." I said, "You're sure of that?" He goes, "Yeah, we're going to put the shoring up here, and we've had our instruments on the building for a few hours now, and the building is not moving. And I said, and you're sure? Yep, absolutely sure. Now, as we discussed, we still haven't heard officially what brought the building down. So at that time, there was no way to know what brought the building down. And because of that, there was no way to know for sure that it was safe. And we're standing in a building that's partially collapsed. We're using aluminum tubes to hold up a 13-story building. And I'm glad that resonates with everybody else, because I was thinking about it at the time, like, anyway, you know, there was an interview at one point. The PIO finally tracked me down on day 2, and it's like, you have got to go give an interview. All right. And the first thing that the guy asked me was, well, tell me about the hazards. And I hadn't slept in a couple days by that point. So like, the hazards, like, they're endless. Like, they just don't cease. Like, you can get impaled by the rebar that you're climbing over. You can have the building fall on you. I had enough time to think about the guys after 9/11, and all the respiratory issues and the cancers and things that had occurred. And we were given a solid effort at wearing masks the whole time that we were there. But in order for you to communicate, you needed to almost read lips. So if I needed to tell you something and something critical, I needed to pull my mask off so that you could read my lips to understand what I was trying to say. If I was wearing the mask, it made my eye protection fog up, which, okay, well, you know, you're underground, what's the big deal? Well, every time the wind would blow off the beach, it was picking up the dust and blowing rocks and stuff in your eyes. So you were constantly, you know, trying to choose, well, I can either have my glasses fog up and trip over this rock and get impaled by this rebar, or I can have him not understand what I'm saying and then, you know, move the wrong thing and get crushed or hurt. They were limitless. After I did my size up, I went back to my boss, told him, you know, what we were working on. She's trapped. It's going to be hours and hours and hours. You know, that's always the constant thing that, you know, anybody that's been a supervisor, that's been on one of these entrapment calls, it's always how much longer, how much longer, how much longer. And this is going to be hours, if not days, depending on how many slabs we're going to have to go through to get to her. So I wanted to warn them right off the bat, hey, we're going to be here a very, very long time. There's nothing about it that's safe, and I'm going to consume a ton of resources to do this. But, as we've discussed, she is alive, and the risk-benefit analysis right now is, yes, we have to be here. Despite all the dangers, despite all of the things that are screaming that the rest of this building is going to collapse on us, this is the right place for us at this time, because that's what we do. There's somebody who's trapped. We're their only option to get out, and we need to make this happen. It was a very surreal feeling after I, you know, did the size up, briefed my boss. I went and found a spot that was a natural choke point. You couldn't get in or out of the basement without coming by this one spot. So I figured that was the best place for me to be able to position myself, because what we were having, you know, the word heroic gets thrown around a lot, and everybody that was there that day, in whatever role that they were filling, they were doing something heroic. What I knew was going to happen, and it did, was guys were finding excuses or reasons to be in that spot, and then wouldn't leave. They didn't want to leave. So they would get an assignment to bring a piece of shoring down to the basement, and then just would stay. So I had to get pretty stern about, hey, these are the units or these are the companies that are going to be at the breach point. Everybody else out. If I walked away for 2 seconds, I would grab one of our technical rescue lieutenants and position him in that spot and say, listen, the same thing. Nobody gets in or out past this spot, and if they give you, if they give you any flack, it's on my order. Absolutely not. Nobody comes in or out without me knowing about it, because that would happen. You turn your back for 2 seconds, and guys would be in the spot trying to do whatever they could to get this woman out.
She was talking to us, that was the problem.
Right, and it was just a bizarre situation in that very few times in your career do you have enough time to evaluate all of the hazards and all of the risks, and then ask yourself, am I really still supposed to be here, and have enough time to answer that question for yourself? Yeah, she's still alive. We do still have a place here.
So I'll jump to the role I found myself in that morning. As union president, I knew the complexity of this, the amount of time it would take for us to do this job, and how many resources were not just going to be flowing in from around Miami-Dade County, but from around the country and the world. Our GP called me that morning and said, "What do you need?" I said, "Send everybody." I know we have 2 concerns already in the morning after. The first was, we don't know what the exposure risk is here to whatever it was in that building when it was standing. And every time the wind would blow off the ocean, you would see it would kick up clouds of dust. And you just knew it could be anything from asbestos to heavy metals. Just didn't know. And to his credit, a member of his science and research division flew in, and because of a relationship that we have with the University of Miami, we more or less borrowed, with their approval, all the air monitoring equipment that was necessary. And there was pieces of equipment being assembled on step ladders that were being put around the site to monitor the air. And we built the plane literally as it was falling back to the earth. The parts were in the air, and we were assembling it to allow us to monitor the exposure risk, to mitigate it through the reallocation of resources as it relates to P100s. And based upon the information and the guidance we received from Dr. Brazant from FDNY over the phone, and from our friends at University of Miami, we were able to set up a means by which to dramatically reduce the exposure risk, but also to monitor it for the first time, to let us know what individuals that were working there, sworn and otherwise, were exposed to. We actually have that data collected. That was the first thing that the International was able to provide for us. And the second one was, you just had this sickening feeling that you knew that there was going to be a tremendous loss of life at this incident, and it was going to take a toll on everyone working on that scene. So to Rick's credit, and those that responded with him, Frank Lito and others, the peer support individuals that came in were among the most experienced. I remember asking specifically for anyone that was trained as a peer support counselor that had experience at the Ghost Ship or at 9/11, because this was a version of that. And to their credit, I think you had a presence of 14 individuals at a minimum 24 hours a day, and for the duration of the incident out there. And as with all of us, it's in our DNA, we don't want to talk to anybody. But if they walk by the 3rd time, you go, "Hey, how you doing?" Sometimes they'd open up, and you would notice in their off time, in the periods of their operation where they were supposed to be resting, they were milling about, and they wanted to start talking. So we started to buy things that guys need: deodorant, toiletries, toothpaste, and we were able to say, "Oh, if you need those, go over there and talk to them." And we learned a lot of lessons that I think are going to drive some changes at the international level that's going to make this organization even more capable of responding to assist our members wherever they're working around the country. I want to summarize with a couple things that I heard here for the first time, and then I also know, having been there, is the lessons I think you take away from this are, when you arrive at something of this magnitude, know that you're going to be there a while. Describe what you see. humbly admit what you don't know, constantly reevaluate on a risk-benefit model. Should we be here? How long should we be here? What are we risking to what benefit? And probably the most important thing I think we all saw is, despite Florida Task Force 1 being headquartered in Miami-Dade and staffed by many of our members, the reflex time to get resources on scene and on site, it takes time. So the moment you know that there is a potential for the need for any resources you have in your region, your hometown, in your state, the moment you perceive the need, ask for it. You can always cancel it, but ask for it as soon as you see the need. So I want to make sure that we leave some time for questions. So at this point, Rick, if you want to.
Oh, sure. It's in there good. There we go.
All right, folks, are there any questions? Any questions? I know there's got to be some in here. There's, let me work through just a little bit here.
So, as Billy was saying, from an IFF perspective, is that we were able to get on the ground fairly quickly. We brought down our initial set of peers, but one of the things, and
Hang on a second, this requires a prop, is that we, as you know, we all get these little yellow lanyards, the yellow and black lanyards.
And our peer support folks had these on. We were required to get a card to get into the area. You had to have it. It was part of their accountability program. And these cards, these guys that clipped them on, they said, let's just put them on our yellow lanyards. We're walking around, and as Billy was saying, is that as folks were going back and forth, taking a break, and as you can imagine, the whole time there was pretty amazing. I didn't get there at the beginning. I was there about a week later, but an amazing sight of all the work that was going on. These yellow lanyards were an identification for our peer support folks, our peer teams. And just them walking around, people on the pile, people sitting off, people taking a break, people walking back and forth, all kinds. They would see that yellow lanyard, and they would then identify that, hey, I can talk to that person. And as Billy said, we set up different sites around the place where they could sit and talk and work, and an amazing amount of conversation that was going on immediately. And so there's the stories, I had heard a few of the smaller pieces, but the stories this afternoon, they wrench at your heart, at your psyche, and at what we do as a core. So one question, I'll start off a little bit here. So we've got some time, and I want to make sure that we respect that and respect our folks that are online, and we appreciate you folks being online listening to us. But from a first arriving perspective, you had an amazing kind of picture in your brain as you were turning the corner. What did you when you turned that corner, what was it you actually saw and thought as you walked up there? I know the oh shit thing, but I mean, aside from that, can you go through that risk assessment process and as you turn that corner? Because it's instinctful. It sounds like you've worked through that very harshly to really work through it and to evaluate every single time. So can you just walk back a little bit for that, please?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the risk versus benefit is something I take very, very seriously, more so than I think a lot of my peers, because when I was handing my gold badge, the chief was like, you drive the crew. And it's true. I got to make sure these guys get home safe, and I'm not going to risk anything if there's nothing to save. So turning the corner of knowing and seeing that, I remember watching at Station 11 when that second plane hit the towers, very vividly, and knowing how many of our guys were in there and I burst into tears in the station. I ran to my dorm. I mean, I'm a girl, I can cry anyway, but still, you're not trying to cry in the firehouse. And I knew how many of our guys were in there already. And then the building comes down, and Taft's description on the radio of it almost resembles 9/11, it really did, because you had a building standing and then you had this pile of crap. Like, you saw, and being a canine specialist, I've been on a lot of piles of rubble, and I have never seen anything quite like it, where it just was this heaping, compacted, non-void having pile, and just the sinking feeling of knowing that there's probably nothing I can do on that pile. But there is something that I can do because I have the training, expertise, and I have the apparatus that's in good working order, and there's no chiefs there yet to get in my way.
Yeah. In the Wildland Fire Service, we have the 18 situations that shout, "Watch out." Actually, we have 19. The 19th is when a battalion chief arrives on scene. And so I understand that very, very closely to that.
But I will say I was very blessed that Vicki Bird, she'd only been a chief for 6 months, but I don't think anybody has more certs than her on the department or anywhere. And she is just an encyclopedia of knowledge, and the checklist that she had in her head, I'm like, you were calling for things I didn't even know we had, once they arrived. I was blessed that the chiefs did stand behind my decision, reluctantly so, because everyone's talking about the collapse zone, and it kept on the radio, "Oh, you're in the collapse zone." And I'm like, I have eyes, I can see, yes, I know this building is coming down. I'm fully aware of the danger. But again, reassessing with my crew, bouncing it off my crew. 3 of us are parents. My kids are the oldest, but Brian's got 4 girls, and they're all small, and Chris has 2, and Gabby's young, and, still her life matters. So it was really recalculating each time and watching the crack on the building that everybody saw, because on the Alpha Bravo corner, between like the 3rd and the 5th story, was this giant crack in the concrete that was getting bigger. And for the engineers, I like the engineers, but I don't believe them, because we were on the building and the guys were in the building and the stuff was falling off the building. And, the first part, I had my helmet and my gear, and then I was like, you know what? Brian and I said, you know what, if we're gonna die, I'm sweating to death. I just took everything off. I had my pants, my pants on, and helmet, everything, and every time we go down, I'm like, I need water, just bucket, water, all the water. I couldn't get enough water in. And we were just on autopilot of doing our tasks, staying focused on the task, and that's like a big, I think, marker for success, where if somebody says, oh, what would you do different? I would have brought the water cooler up in the bucket. Honestly, I would have brought the water cooler up in the bucket.
Yeah.
Because there just was not enough water. The air was it just parched. I can't even describe to you.
Mid-June, guys, I mean, folks, it's just humid as
1 o'clock in the
can
morning,
be.
it's like 90 degrees with 90% humidity. And, the hot ocean air is coming, and it's the dust is just in the glass. The dust is just, you couldn't breathe. Respiratory protection was the last thing on my mind, because I'm shouting. I can't get, every dumb rescue from Homestead's taking arrival on the air, and I can't get a word in edgewise.
Yeah.
Thank you for the 40th rescue and staging arriving. I appreciate that, but I'm trying to get backboards and people to help me get people out of a bucket without falling off. I get them off a building and then I drop them off the side of the truck to their, fall them on their head. So it was really tough to stay focused on my task, because there was a lot of noise, because I could see, we wanted to position the truck caddy corner on the Alpha Bravo corner, because I knew that was my optimum position for my maximum reach on the ladder, but also if anything came down, it would be, it's really not gonna follow that. And then these guys show up and they're like, oh, you're blocking the whole intersection because it's a 50-foot truck. And I was like, really? So I'm not really happy. I looked at pictures afterwards of our positioning. I wasn't really happy with that. But, we were able to afford 12 rescues in a really short period of time, without any injury physically. The mental injuries are are deep, and it's going to take a long time. I'm blessed. I have to touch on my peer counselor, Richie Portello from FDNY, is a lifesaver. That guy, because he gets it. I could sit around and talk to peer counselors, the CISM, and it's the first time in my almost 22-year career that I actually had to say, okay, this is it. This is it. This isn't, oh, dangerous. No, I know this building is coming down because it's moving and stuff's falling, and they're like, oh my gosh, the building's moving. Please come get us. Hurry. And knowing that and accepting that this is what I trained for, this is what I signed up for. God put me in that bucket at that moment with that ladder with my crew to do that. I truly believe that in my heart, and really going back of staying on task. And if anybody gets a large-scale incident, if you can slow down, slower is faster, Battalion 1 is our motto, and it really worked out because you have the most senior officers in Battalion 1. I think I'm the least senior with 22 years of all the officers that were on scene that night in the first arriving group. And so everyone's pretty much calm, cool, and collected, even though, you want to freak out and run around and scream like the cops were. And I didn't know how bad it was until I watched their body cam video and for what they rolled up on, because they stage around in Surfside and they're always looking for stuff because, heavily populated Orthodox Jewish community is a target. They're always a target. And they have armed guards outside of their temple on a daily basis. So, those things reassessing, risk versus benefit. Anybody out there, you need to really always take that in consideration. Yeah, worth it. Being in 4 feet of water, guys getting shocked with electrical tools, it's just not working. And you guys didn't even get, you didn't get the bravo at the end of getting her out, and that's the thing that sucks with these guys.
Well, Chief, and as she was talking about that risk analysis, and you have moved the microphone down there, I stole yours, I apologize. And you listen to her as you have to do is to have those eyes back there. Can you talk a little bit about, and as she says, the effort, you drive just a little bit deeper the effort that it took to get the lady out of that car, because I think that there's a little further story that goes into her coming out.
Well, so that was a whole nother chapter. She didn't come out that day. It was probably a month later at the very end of the delayering or debris removal process that she came out.
Post-implosion.
There was a fire. I think that the fire probably started far earlier in the day. When I did my initial size up of the site, one of our hazmat members was there with a meter, and I asked him, "Hey, how are your levels?" And he says, "Oh, well, they're good now." They're good now. What do you mean? He says, "Oh, well, the CO was up to 30 earlier in the morning." I said, "Oh man, that's not good, especially because." And I asked, have we been running any gas tools here in the basement? He says, "No." All right. Later in the day, there was a very large fire got going. I had been relieved to go to rehab, and while I was in rehab, like I said, there were 2 different radio channels that were being used, and finally getting some Gatorade and a sandwich, and I hear on one radio frequency somebody's describing a fire. And then on another frequency, I'm hearing guys call for water cans. And those two descriptions, the description of the fire that the people on one channel are describing, and the guys on the interior asking for water cans, those 2 descriptions didn't make sense. So it's the classic, we talk about the importance of having outside eyes and inside eyes. And you have that company officer or that nozzle man that's inside and says, "Hey, we've got it. The fire's knocked down. Everything's good." And you have the guy who's outside who's describing a conflagration, and how important it is that we use information from both sources to make good decisions. And while I was there in rehab, man, this doesn't make any sense. The guys on the outside are talking about setting up master streams to attack a very large fire. We had no smoke down below. Right. And then guys inside are saying, hey, send me a water can. That was my first indication that we had a very big problem that wasn't, that two sides were not seeing the same picture. The guys inside ended up being evacuated because master streams were going to be used on the building. And prior to the fire starting, we had had a confirmation that the victim was alive. The crews had to be evacuated for several hours while the master streams were able to work on the building. And then when we got the go-ahead from the engineers to go back in, was when we did another assessment, and the victim was determined not to be viable any longer. The risk-benefit balance had changed at that point, and we could no longer justifying risking people in the building without a viable victim to be working to rescue. And that was a big deal, and I think it continues to be a big deal, because no drill ever ends that way. No drill ever ends, no rescue drill ever ends with, well, sorry, you're just not going to get this one, and we're done. So I think that's going to be a big issue for a long time. Is we made the right decision ultimately, and didn't lose any firefighters because of it. But the toll that took on the rescuers, all of them, I think even the command staff was going to be affected by that information, that they had worked hours and hours and hours, everybody to focus all of their attention on this rescue effort that was ultimately not going to be successful, and not even like briefly unsuccessful. It was another month. So,
Right.
Yes.
Right. And thank you. Thank you all for the discussion, the conversation, the telling of the story. And I'm sure that, unfortunately, it's probably opened up some stitches that you guys are already dealing with. We are proud that you were able to come and share that story with us today. We're thankful that you're here. Billy, we're thankful for you to gather up an amazing group of folks who have an amazing story and continue to have an amazing story. And we wish all of you the best. Keep up with the support you have and your needs. And I can't thank you enough for being here today. Folks, thank you very much yourselves for showing up. I hope every one of you can take into some of the thoughts, and as you go throughout your career, thinking about these incidences where these were life and death situations that they were talking about, not only themselves, but also the folks that they were rescuing, and some of the important concepts that they have with that, with the risk assessment continuing on. So with that, folks, again, thank you. We appreciate you folks that were online, and have a great day.